A very brief introduction from me now, just to hand over to Aida Mehonic, who's leading our panel on open source innovation in practice. Take it away, Aida.
Thank you, Ariel. Hello? It's not on. I think it's on now. Okay, brilliant. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for this second panel discussion today. We're going to be talking about open innovation in practice. You'll notice I'm steering away from precise definitions about open AI or open source or open source AI. We'll talk about sort of practicalities that we encounter working in the open when we're trying to create innovative solutions for in our different fields. So this morning we've seen a really brilliant discussion around regulation and the kind of call to action around what we want to achieve as a community in the space of open AI and open innovation. And in this panel, I'm fortunate to be joined by experts who are all hands-on sort of doers in their field, implementing day-to-day open source solutions to do with data science or AI. So I was hoping that in this panel we can dig into some of those kind of pragmatic, practical challenges that they encounter in their kind of daily efforts. I mean, a canonical example, excuse me, in our space is healthcare. So I've seen time and time again, sort of very well-motivated, well-meaning researchers want to make a difference using AI in healthcare, and then it takes something like 2 years for them to even access data, let alone then later turn that into actionable insights that are robust enough and ethically transparent enough in order to be able to be deployed in clinical settings. And with that in mind, I am thrilled to introduce the panelists. So perhaps everyone could sort of take 2 minutes to introduce themselves and explain where you've come from and sort of what AI, what open source and open AI you encounter in your work, very briefly. Yes.
Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Have a major jet lag. Just came from the US. Thank you so much for the invitation. Can you hear me in the back? No. So I should project. Or maybe put up the mic, I don't know. Okay, so my name is Mariangela Mihai. I am actually a social scientist and anthropologist, trained in political and legal anthropology, as well as ethnographic filmmaking and media ethics. And I come with a background of human rights. I have a long history in working with NGOs, I don't know what they're called here, non-governmental organizations, that deal with migration, refugees, and other kind of communities impacted by global conflicts. I also am working in generative AI. I've worked on some projects at Google as an analyst and evaluator, writer, factuality expert, and more recently at Meta on the red team, which is kind of like white hacking, trying to ensure that the models are as safe as possible, right? So these are the hats I'm bringing here to the table. They are all connected. They have to do with how we tell stories and how we create worlds, and how we are or not inclusive of communities that are not always in a position of power, yeah? So I think, let's say, trigger warning, I'm a techno-pessimist, so you will hear that a lot in my analysis. And a disclaimer, I am not speaking in behalf of Google or Meta, you know those NDAs. This is my analysis as a social scientist solely, okay?
Brilliant, thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Coldicutt. I run an independent organisation called Careful Trouble, and we do two different things. So on the one hand, we work with all kinds of organisations and governments to make their technology better in various ways, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we do other work, which is making things happen that put community power at the heart of that, right? And so that can be anything from running an internet company that is owned by the people who live in a in a particular neighbourhood, to sort of championing very different ways of making technologies. And I've been working on the web for nearly 30 years, and I spent like the first 20 years doing a lot of work in open source, particularly in the arts. And I think one of the things I want to bring to the conversation today is that when I'm working with companies who are thinking about how they adopt tech, or policymakers who are thinking about how AI in particular might influence the UK, it feels like open source is not something that people remember. And I think if there's, you know, it feels like we're at a particular moment where Microsoft are all over everything. And I think there's a real power and an opportunity in making open something that more people can relate to, use, understand. And I will just close by saying one of the biggest things about technology that makes it much easier to buy a Microsoft or a Google thing is they make it easy, right? And I think for all sorts of reasons that are legitimate, open is much harder. And it would be amazing if like everyone here could collaborate to make it easier.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Buckley. I work for an organisation called OpenMined. So we are a non-profit foundation that builds open source data access, data governance infrastructure. So OpenMind's probably been going for about 7 years and sort of emerged as an open source community. I think we now have, we use the figure 17,000 members, which is basically the number of people in our Slack, which, you know, I'll take as good a metric as any. But then we also have kind of a core team of probably about 30 individuals sort of spread in all corners of the world, mostly on the engineering side. So we sort of have folks from who have backgrounds in sort of distributed systems engineering, privacy engineering, sort of advanced cryptography. We then have kind of a small product team, and then a very small policy team, of which I am 50% of. So I largely cover the work we do in sort of the UK and Europe, as well as some particular work stream we have with the United Nations, sort of working with different statistics officers through the UN Statistics Division. I guess like briefly, my kind of past life sort of started out my career as a software engineer before moving more into sort of the policy space maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Nowhere near as an impressive CV as Chiamura had, so I won't go into any detail, but sort of worked for a while in DCIT, specifically in what was then called the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. So kind of trying to advise government on a lot of these kind of ethical issues around technology adoption with, let's say, mixed success. I'm not an impartial civil servant anymore, so I get to give more of an opinion, I suppose. But yeah, kind of started working for OpenMined earlier this year, and I guess where we're interested in sort of this open source conversation is obviously, you know, maybe most obviously in the first instance, we are an open source community. All our software is open source. We greatly benefit from, you know, all these things that people in this room will be familiar with in terms of sort of the level of transparency provided by open source technologies, the ability to kind of build on work that other people have done, pull in other software libraries, sort of stand on the shoulders of giants, I guess, in that kind of aspect. So yeah, very kind of keen to talk about that. But then I suppose as well, we're also very interested in sort of the application of the sort of type of data infrastructure that we build and, you know, others build as well, and the implications of that for sort of the AI ecosystem, for want of a better term, that we build. And I suppose our contention would be, I think very recently we're starting to see this a bit more in sort of the news. By the news, I mean like not BBC News, but like the depths of sort of Twitter and now Blue Sky. It seems to be increasingly popular. But this idea that kind of, I think people are clocking on to the fact that it's, you know, these AI models and sort of AI more generally, it's not all just about compute, which seems to have been a lot of the narrative over the past couple of years. And we would contend that probably like data is actually like much more important aspect. So I think there's then sort of really significant implications around, well, if the AI, for AI systems we develop, for them to do really useful things, like you want to train them on contextual, high quality data assets and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the really interesting use cases are in sectors where, data is by nature sensitive and or regulated. So how do you build the sort of protocols that enable that data to be leveraged for beneficial purposes, right? And I think, we would argue that there's a strong case that if you make those protocols open source, as opposed to sort of proprietary protocols, that you're going to enable sort of a fairer, more transparent ecosystem, and sort of enable this kind of to be more of a public good infrastructure than perhaps we're seeing at the moment.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Jiang-Kells. I am a research software engineer. So I'm very much on the implementation and deployment side, in the trenches, actually doing the work. So I've been working with the UCLH Biomedical Research Center, particularly on projects involving real-time AI and NLP applications integrated in electronic health record systems at the point of care, which is a mouthful. I have also recently founded .implement AI, of which I am 100% of, to make open source developer tools for AI applications. And this is very much inspired by my experience working at UCLH. So I'm trying to build open source tools to make what I'm building at UCLH more accessible to other places and organizations. And also at UCLH, a lot of the applications we build are also based on open source, general NLP and AI libraries. So that's my experience with open source.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the introduction. So maybe let's kick off with Jennifer and Dave, focusing on why have you chosen open source as a kind of backbone of what you're developing? Why have you chosen open source frameworks? Is it to sort of build in trust by design through scrutiny, as we've heard earlier in the presentations this morning? Is it about scale of adoption? Is it about reaching sort of diverse and underrepresented communities? Or is it a little bit of all of that and something else? So perhaps let's start with Jennifer.
Yes, as I think in healthcare, I think open source is essential because at its core, we're still building a technology, an AI application, and a lot of the advances in AI and machine learning have been based in open source libraries, and it's able to do so at such a rapid rate because open source, as you say, enables collaboration, and it has this built-in guardrail of scrutiny. And so I think in order for the similar advances to translate into the field of healthcare, we also need to build open source tools to go along with that open source technology so that the whole end-to-end pipeline is more transparent, so that innovators can actually think about their AI application as a whole, as how it will be adopted by the eventual users. And from that perspective, it also helps in designing more ethical, more robust AI applications, as well as having the scrutiny of transparency and all that comes with it. So I think from my perspective, it's also from how you think about the adoption of more widespread AI applications.
Is it sort of the classical more eyes on the problem will find the bug sooner and fix it sort of angle towards ultimately creating a more robust code base. Thank you. Dave, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, the short answer is all of the above. I think perhaps getting more specific, at least from OpenMind's point of view, maybe there's sort of three things I can sort of quickly cover. So I think there's this general point around sort of benefiting from the broader open source ecosystem. So I'd say, so OpenMind, what we basically have a single product called PySift. You can go on GitHub and find the repo there. But this is essentially aiming to provide APIs at sort of a data infrastructure layer for doing this kind of privacy-preserving analysis on sensitive data assets. But that's using kind of novel privacy technologies, novel cryptographic technologies. But what PySift is essentially trying to abstract all that away, because nobody, a sort of end user, developer, data scientist doesn't really want to know about that. They just want the assurances that it works, I guess. So our software stack is more of kind of like an integration of these different techniques to provide those sort of end-to-end privacy guarantees, and then provide these kind of high-level APIs that sort of data scientists and data owners can leverage. So I think probably exclusively, we do not like implement any of those underlying sort of cryptographic techniques or primitives ourselves. We're relying on other open source implementations. So that's a huge aspect of it, right? It's like you can make use of sort of software that other people have built and which other communities have kind of convened around, and which maybe then sort of emerges the standards, and then hopefully others can do that with our technology as well. The second point I think is also that kind of security through transparency idea, which I think is really, really key. Like if you look at sort of, especially again, the sort of software we're working on, it's data privacy, right? So ultimately we want our technology to be used by people so that they can, maximize the benefits of sort of these sensitive data assets, but it needs to be sort of provably secure and trustworthy and all this kind of stuff. And you look at history and sort of the development of various sort of cybersecurity technologies, sort of SSL, and the way we kind of interact online on the internet every day, and kind of trust that like our bank details, etc., whatever other information we share is going to be encrypted to a standard that we just implicitly trust that things aren't going to break, and we aren't going to sort of, our data isn't going to get hacked essentially, which I guess we can't prevent all the time, but that's all relied on open source communities, right? So being able to have that security through transparency, I think is a huge one. And I guess finally, and maybe this is, perhaps the most important one from our side, is this idea of enabling this kind of infrastructure to be a public good. And this kind of, I don't know, you could, there are various ways you could talk about this, but I think there's kind of, our contention again is that if you look maybe like 5, 10, 15 years ahead, this sort of next frontier seems like it's going to be around sort of data access. And fundamentally, like the value of the value of a data asset isn't really sort of inherent in and of itself. It's like what you do with it, how you integrate it with other data assets, etc. And because of that, there's sort of an inherent network effect that you get when you're able to kind of make sort of that data accessible, because you can extract more and more value and more beneficial use by integrating that with other data assets and things like that. So if there's a network effect, what that might mean in principle is then like protocols emerge, standard protocols emerge, being able to do this in practice. And in which case, to sort of maximize the benefit, you want that to be public good infrastructure that is interoperable, much like the kind of foundational sort of protocols of the internet, I guess, which again were somewhat by accident, I suppose, sort of developed in the open and became this sort of publicly stewarded public good infrastructure. There's another world where, maybe later on we can get into specific healthcare examples, but there is another world where these are proprietary protocols, and we end up with fragmented sort of data sharing protocols, which I think would be bad news, basically.
So it's sort of a little bit like the internet today was run on protocols that were proprietary within AT&T, and what was the other large company back in the day?
I think AT&T came very, very close to sort of
to lobbying to run the internet on their proprietary protocol. Well, Thank you, Dave. That's a fascinating, fascinating pitch for what you guys are trying to achieve. It's really impressive. And I think it's sort of partly a response to Rachel's observation earlier that the community needs to, I guess, always keep front of mind the kind of ease of use, kind of make it too easy not to do, open sort of thing, that, which is one of the motto, really, one of our guiding North Stars in the Turing Way project. And PySift, sorry, sounds like, you know, it would be an easy to use product to create to create this part of the pipeline. Now, turning to Rachel, I guess I'm intrigued by your observation that currently in sort of high up government circles and the establishment, the open community is not seen, you know, is not sort of central stage of the AI debate. And I could speculate why that is. It could be, you know, has the AI debate been taken over by the doom and gloom people who tend to be louder than the open source communities, or is it about the previous prime minister fanboying Elon Musk, as we've heard in the keynote? How perhaps the AI debate has been dominated by commercial, sort of large tech company voices, and the open source communities have been less represented. So I'm just curious as to what your view is on why this has happened. And then in your work, working with communities and working with sort of perhaps some of them being marginalized, but affected, but not, you know, having a direct say in the development of these technologies, how have you found your job in advocating for their needs and representing their needs to kind of the high echelons of power in this country, and how that's changing? And I don't know, maybe you'll be a techno pessimist like Mariangela, but
I mean, it depends how provocative I want to be, I suppose. I mean, like I think probably a number of other people here, I sent our response to the industrial strategy in last night. The industrial strategy committee, I don't want to sound like I'm obsessed with Microsoft, but the committee is chaired by the CEO of Microsoft. And I would say there's no mention of openness, particularly in the Green Paper. It's not even something that people are thinking of. And I think one of the things that has happened here, I think, which is quite a sad kind of Brexit outcome, is I think there's a very strong open community in Europe. There's a lot happening thinking about the PI, in particular digital public infrastructure, which is, I think, a conversation that's not really getting off the ground here in the UK. And I could speculate on who has the ear of people in power, and the role of a think tank that is run by a former prime minister in that. But I think really one of the issues is that when people want quick results, right, they want something easy. They want a magic line that goes up, and they want to be promised everything, right? The reality is that things are hard, right? And no one wants to hear that things are hard. And one of the other things I think that's happening here is there's almost no money now that is flowing into digital civil society. So I'm like a professional pain in the bum, basically, and I sort of get myself into places and conversations where I'm often not really wanted. And so this morning, for instance, I was speaking at an event about digital ID. I was the only person there who did not either work in government or at a tech company. And the reason was this was a play event, which I'd kind of, I don't know, kind of made it happen. But it's like we don't really have, I think, currently a vibrant narrative space here. We don't have money that is moving around that makes it easier to tell stories about what works and how. What I hate is that I'm quite often in the room being negative, speaking against, right? And that's exhausting. What I want to be talking about is plural, open opportunities and better ways of working. And so I think the other thing that's happened, and maybe what I will say is that it's, the two things to think about here are money and narrative, right? So there's an amazing amount of great high quality research that is happening, but the research community is quite often talking to itself at quite a deep level of complexity. And I go to lots of meetings where I think fundamentally people don't want to look stupid. They don't want to not know. They don't want there to be acronyms. They don't want to be words they don't understand, and they don't want to ask because for whatever reason, curiosity is not something that is now aligned with being powerful. Power is about knowing everything, right? And so I would say broadly, the job of advocating for people who are underrepresented in power is not going brilliantly in the UK at the moment. I am very disappointed that this government has not been more open, more progressive, that it's leaning very heavily on industry. And I think, we have to keep trying to make it different. Sorry, that was really negative. I don't know if,
Not enough.
And Mariangela is a techno-pessimist. Over to you.
No, I appreciate all the points. And there's so much happening in my head. One of the questions I would ask, and I know this has been discussed and will continue to be discussed a lot, is there any system that is actually open source? And on what criteria do we decide that? This generosity with which we use the term, it's actually kind of suspicious to me. Because, there's been research that shows that, even the major players in open source field, they're not so open source, right? They reveal some things about themselves and others, they're black box. And that's consistent across, let's say, all LLMs models, right, that are out there. So that's one problem. The second problem that I see is the question of innovation. Like, what is innovation? By whom and for whom and how? Yeah, that's also a question. I don't have answers. All I'm saying is that these modes of embracing certain terms that are in the interest of, governments and the whatever, even civil societies, without questioning them, are dangerous for the futures we are co-creating, right? So are you really needing to adopt AI, or you're just like fearing of missing out, yeah? Because if you're just in the FOMO mode, then that's not responsible AI adoption. That's just wanting to do it because everybody does it and you don't want to, be left behind without understanding the consequences in the now and in the future of what that means, right? So I'm all for innovation. I'm also a tech fan at the same time, so, there's a split in my mind. However, I think our gaze has to be for a more distant future than now, than 5 years, than 10 years, yeah? And so when you have a so-called open model that farms people for data that is sensitive, especially for marginalized communities, what you also do is you open up the space for techno-fascism, right? And we see that in the United States. Like right now, everybody's freaked out because what do we have in power, right? We have fascism plus technology, Musk, yeah? So we don't know what's going to happen with the adoption of AI in, at the borders, for example, or in managing immigration and the exclusion of certain people from citizenship, and so on and so forth. So yeah, in terms of futurity, I would hope that we can all critique and be really analytical about the categories that are thrown around in the industry and when it comes to AI in general.
Thank you. And that builds on the point that Rachel made around sort of reclaiming the narrative and also, money being a big part of who gets to create that narrative. And it sounds like it's not going brilliantly over in the US either. So, perhaps, recognizing that these, as we've heard earlier, these problems are incredibly difficult as well. I've joined the Alan Turing Institute 6.5 years ago, hoping to do some good. And I thought, oh, well, I'm sort of technical. I also have some industry experience, and, I'm sure I can code up some predictive algorithm to sort of help reduce hospital admissions or something. So you sort of enter this field hoping that the impact, will sort of happen 2-3 years down the line, and it's a lot slower, and the agenda gets captured, before you sort of realize by vested interests. Let's call it that way. But I wonder, what would be your call to action? What can we do? What should we be doing in sort of 2025, both here and in the US? I mean, Jennifer's got her hands busy coding up these protocols to, she hasn't given up. She is trying to create, better patient outcomes ultimately using her knowledge as a machine learning expert. And, Dave's organization, that's a non-profit, by the way, is helping create the infrastructure, public infrastructure that enables this. Both efforts incredibly, optimistic. And I wonder, perhaps Rachel, over to you. What should we be doing?
Well, just to pick up, I have a sticker that's available to buy that says FOMO is not a strategy. So I believe that very deeply. We see a lot of it. So it's like, but I think there is a kind of FOMO, right, that we can have legitimately, which is like putting forward ideas that work, that will make a difference, right? And I think, so we have been, for the last year, thinking about and trying to shape what does a sort of really effective movement look like of progressive technology that is not a sort of kooky, nice to have and the side of thing, but is legitimate and at the table and helping to shape decisions. So we're doing a little bit of work trying to raise a little bit of money to do some movement building, which is important. I think one of the most difficult things is that if we're thinking about government policy, that moves in ways, like it kind of moves in its own way. We can't all keep up with everything. And there's an extent to which can we choose the most important moments to intervene. I'm very, very hopeful, I think, about the AI summit in Paris in February. I think there will be a really different narrative that comes out of that. And I wonder, is there an opportunity to use a little bit of the energy there to be talking about things and doing things and bringing along people who wouldn't normally know what open is? And I think, just as a word of, I think it's very unfortunate that OpenAI are called OpenAI. I mean, I think we probably all think that, right? And so it's like, what is a good name for a thing, right? And how can you talk about that in a way that is not, unfortunately, sort of selling the wares of, I think, possibly a very extractive, immoral company. So I don't have like a magical answer, but I think keep doing, keep making, keep sharing. And in my very, I think, naive, optimistic heart of hearts, I do always think it is worth having one ready over here that you've already made, so that when it goes completely wrong, you're able to say, oh, look, I've sorted it out. Here's the software. Here's our policy idea. You know, never hopeless, I don't think.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to come in on what should we do, Dave?
Yeah, I guess I was going to pick up on some of the points that that Rachel made. I think there's so much I could pick up on because I just fully agree with all of this. I think like the OpenAI point really struck home. So like my organization is called OpenMined. So typically what happens when I come to these events and like network, people go, oh, do you mean OpenAI or do you mean DeepMind? And I'm like, no, neither of those. And then when you explain it, they're like, okay, so you guys are a non-profit. Oh, like OpenAI was a non-profit. When are you going to sell it? You know, when are you going to make this sneaky move to become a for-profit company? And it's like, we're not, because we have principles. That's a whole different ballgame. But the sort of the ecosystem we're in has, like, the sort of power imbalance is just enormous, right? And you know, as we've been talking about, it's the easy thing to do, and especially, you know, when you have, I guess, the government at the moment where the number one priority is growth, and you're looking for quick solutions to that. Of course, you're going to try and get investment from big tech. You're going to try and use those technologies to improve efficiency across the civil service, all these kind of things, because they sound like quick solutions. But those, these kind of more, it's short-term thinking, right? And building these kind of better ways of doing things, I think most people in this room will agree with, and we can sort of paint a vision for how that works. But I think maybe there's two parts here actually. There's the sort of storytelling and the narrative building, and again at the moment I think a lot of the sort of the predominant story perhaps over the past couple of years is you have these, you know, 3 or 4 companies on the west coast of the US who are going to build AGI, whatever that is. And you know, these kind of godlike AIs that we'll all just use, and everything will be great, and you know, we'll solve all the world's problems. Like, we need better narratives to challenge that narrative, right? Because that's not what's going to happen. We'll live in a much better society if we have, you know, like much more like plurality in terms of, like, you know, a plurality of models, a plurality of sort of different data sets, a plurality of different technologies that we can use. So kind of, I think recently there was a paper, there's a group called the Public AI Network, I think it's like publicai.network is the address. And they kind of, that paper that they've written kind of spells out quite a good vision for what this could look like. My reaction to reading it was like, wow, this sounds amazing. But then to sort of one of the other points that Rachel made, it's then, this is amazing, but like, how do you actually do that? And like, building stuff is really hard, and getting to those, you know, achieving those aims, even if you spelt out that ambition, is really hard. And I think fundamentally takes a long time. You know, OpenMined has been a small organization. We're kind of growing, but it's been going for 7 years, and you know, we've had some success. But like, we are very much aware of, like, if you're trying to do something at this, you know, potentially like a sort of global scale, and you're kind of trying to challenge these existing power structures, it is immensely difficult. And I think you have to accept that it's going to take time, and also just like, I guess, it sort of the community building aspect of it, and how we can sort of bring people together behind this, I think is super important as well. So yeah, I'm kind of again encouraged, like, to see the French Summit seems to be a bit more focused on, or at least bringing in a sort of a broader, more inclusive audience. So yeah, I sort of agree with. Hopefully that can be a sort of a moment that we can capture. Yeah, really good.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then we could move over to some questions from the audience. Oh, sorry, did you?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I Yeah, I'm coming from more of a technologist perspective. So as someone, as a technologist, I think, and if there are any technologists in the crowd, I think it is our responsibility to not only build the technology, but also make it accessible and understandable to the community that we build with our open source code. Because I think, you know, just making your code open and transparent doesn't mean anything on its own. For example, in healthcare, you know, all of the things we build ultimately is to benefit patient care. And so when we're building our AI technology, are we asking for input from from the patient groups? And how can we do that? We can't do that if, you know, you're just dropping your code out in the open and just leaving it there and no one understands what it does. So I think part of open source also means making documentation that is easily understandable to a layperson, and trying to reach out to those communities to actually get their input into the process of building technology. Because you know, as you say, I'm a very optimist. I want to build things to make a difference, and I believe that there are enough people out there who also believe in the same thing. So, you know, if we give them the access to do that, if we make it easy for people to voice their opinions and, you know, actually make something of the transparency, we can, you know, get closer to, you know, not having Microsoft do everything for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some sort of repeated themes in this panel have been around accessibility, ease of use, and also plurality of voices, and ultimately building communities, and, you know, the effort that we're all putting into that, I suppose. And now we have some questions from the audience, and the first one is around the funding landscape. So now we've sort of converged on like the exciting notion, the optimistic and idealistic. It's all about the community and talking to your community. And now we're going to move back to talk about the money. So the question is, to what extent is the extremely tight funding landscape going to affect the prevalence of open source AI and ethical approaches, and what should be done to fix it? I was looking at Rachel, but
I can come in on that. I mean, after this, I'm actually going to the UKRI event that was talked about earlier, and I think UKRI money moves in mysterious ways, and it could move differently, and it could move in ways that are more aligned with kind of how the world works rather than how research institutions work. And I think that would be something that would be incredibly helpful. I think there's something about the speed and the cadence of particularly digital and data that doesn't really need to be wrapped up in necessarily the traditional institutional layers that quite often happen. But equally, I think one of the things, you know, it unfortunately does go back to the fact that a lot of people who have money don't understand that this is an issue. So in Europe, the AI Act has had a sort of forcing effect where, because it is happening, and because there are lobbyists all over Brussels, you have, I think, a group of about 20 funders who have come together collectively to fund civil society and other activity. And that actually we don't really have that equivalent here. I mean, I wish I knew where there was money, because I don't have any of it. So I don't have a great answer there, but I do know that there are definitely funds that could be moved towards what I think the society are calling pro-democracy tech, which I think is a really important way of thinking about that now.
Great. Jennifer, did you, oh, sorry, you just raised your microphone, but it wasn't a prompt to speak. Mariangela, I wonder if you could share with us a bit about the sort of perspective from the US around democracy tech, and, in light of everything that's happening over there in the society. And also, perhaps with your hat as an anthropologist, I think what we don't often hear about, at least in the world where I sit and work, is, we talk about, okay, let's use healthcare example again. We'll use AI in healthcare. We'll predict patient sort of outcomes or predict intervention points, and ultimately it'll lead to better patient outcomes. And if this is done with like proper interpretability and robustness and transparency, then everyone wins. I guess what we don't talk about often is gaps in data, who is underrepresented in that data set. What kind of biases have propagated all the way, through decades of sort of just biased institutions collecting data in a way that is biased. And then sort of all of that gets codified in that AI and sort of just propelled further on. I guess as an anthropologist, could you help us sort of understand a little bit about sort of the danger of narratives and cultural identities, even going at one like meta level, being captured and represented by AI and perhaps, misappropriated, and sort of that whole kind of next layer of how AI might create problems in these like futures 5 years down the line and today.
Okay, that's exciting topic. Wow. So I think, this particular combination of being a researcher, right, with a specific methodology that is in-depth and long-term has trained me to think critically in these spaces, right? And so one thing that I know for sure is that actually a lot of people in the tech industry do not think critically with what they do. And so the drive is for speed, is for innovation, however it is sold within specific companies. And the problem is that once you understand what's behind these models, right? Like when you spend your every day breaking them, right? Basically. You also understand how the data from which they draw, even when it's not open source, even when it's not visible, it is clearly extraordinarily biased, right? Because it's about wherever it comes from, and where it comes from is the wide open internet. And who is there creating data? Humans. And what are humans? Biased, right? And what is this data mostly in English? There you go, another problem. All these models are incredibly stupid in other languages. And how can you call that an open, source anything if it doesn't speak to the majority of the global south? How can we call it an open source model when in the space in which these are created and the decisions about how the policies are implemented, people are not represented properly, right? Most subject matter experts are called in to explain, diversity and equity and all this after the models are built, not along the way, because, that's dangerous. They will slow down the process of innovation. And so when we interact with these models as users, I think it's pretty easily evident, even if you're not, trying to hack it, that they are made mostly for white, English-speaking, middle-class, able-bodied Westerners, right? So that's a major issue right there. To change something, we have to change the epistemics of it completely. And that means it's not enough to say we are inclusive of the communities that we represent or that we collaborate with them. These communities and the global south specifically has to be part of the entire development of this worldview, right? That has to do with how technology affects us. So we have many examples of how it can backfire. To go back to the medical environment, this AI system in American hospitals called Whisper, what did it do? It added racial components which were hallucinated to its, notes, transcriptions of medical notes. That's already a disaster when you assume what race someone, a patient is, in a system in which specifically African American patients are really underserved and actually violently so, right, in the United States hospitals with grave consequences. And we have that for everything, applying AI models to social services. We saw that in Denmark, again, was a racialization and bad outcomes for migrants, right? We have it in terms of technologies of wars, again, with grave consequences. China recently has adopted Llama 13B for its militarization purposes, right? So this is the flip side of open models. Not to mention multimodality, which is coming. Right now it's like text to text. Voice is coming, video is coming, right? And those are even harder to contain and to deal with truly ethically and in a responsible way. So together we have to just pay attention to this and, collaborate, work for it, and understand our limitations and also the ways in which we impose ourselves upon the rest of the world, I guess. That's it.
Wow, especially that example of a hallucinating Gen AI model actually being allowed to be deployed in a medical setting. I don't know how that passed the guardrails of their sort of ethical committees. That's I don't know if you know a little bit more about this as a case study. I'm sure the audience would find it interesting to sort of if you could tell us a little bit more about what happened there. What went wrong?
You can Google it. There's articles about it. So the issue here is that most models do hallucinate, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. And it's not going to go away because they're not humans, and they're just making connections between certain datas. The bubble that is being created around this true artificial intelligence, it's a bubble. It's going to burst. It's going to come back. It supports techno-feudalism, which is basically all these big companies in the United States, turning most people into peasants, and that does their work, and even eliminating capitalist forces out of the way, right? And so the hallucinations are a problem for all domains, because you cannot really rely on these models to not present certain risks. You can train them on limited data, and you can have certain safeguards along the way, but you also have to understand really well what the risks are and to check for them constantly, right? Let's say red team it in different meta level and also actual level.
Thank you. So I believe we've got about 5 more minutes. Great. So I wonder if we could take another question from the audience. This one is from Daniela asking, can you describe the perfect environment for responsible AI adoption?
I mean, I think one of the things I would say is that we don't always have to use AI, and I think that that's one of the most important environments for responsibility is being able to say no, and that the idea that AI is inevitable seems to me like it's a very emperor's new clothes thing, that you can just say no and then not do it. But I think culturally that's become very difficult. And so I suppose the ingredient I would then put into the mix is about criticality and honesty, rather than always sort of doing what seems likely to happen next. And maybe the other thing that needs to be there for a responsible AI environment is clarity on responsibility to whom, who are we responsible to? And I think very often, as we've heard, the people who are most dramatically affected by biased, faulty, inadequate AI are not represented in the making of it, the decisions that are made, the acquisitions, the procurement. So yeah, they're my two things.
Thank you. Any closing thoughts, sort of messages for the audience from each of the panelists? You have to share. Maybe start with Dave.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I could just add on this point around responsible AI. Like at a super high level, like this responsible AI term is just kind of a term that's just been thrown around a lot over the past few years, to the point where like I don't really know what it means anymore. So like, every tech company, every organization who's deploying AI or whatever will of course claim they're doing so responsibly. I think a big question is how do you actually, like how do you have meaningful accountability and transparency mechanisms to like even be able to sort of validate that. And I think this, this also just isn't a new problem to a large extent. So like we've seen this with sort of Web 2.0, like social media, the enormous range of harms that have happened have been propagated by social media platforms. But it's been immensely difficult to independently study how those recommender systems, how those online algorithms work. I know I think in the data access bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, there's a new provision to set out a researcher access program like in the Online Safety Act, which would be good. But then it's also like this if we're talking about sort of this new wave of like chatbot style AI, if that's if anything, that's an even more difficult kind of paradigm of being able to understand what are the implications of these models, because you've got people spending a lot of their lives or a lot of their time online kind of interacting in this sort of private conversation with a machine, and how do you even monitor, or well, should you monitor, because like at what point does this become surveillance, but like how do you even get like an understanding that like of the harms or like the benefits, or even like how people are using these tools, so that you can even sort of validate that whatever an organization defines as responsible AI, they're actually living up to that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer either. It's a big access problem, but I think in some ways it's not a new problem, but it's maybe it's going to become even more challenging perhaps going forward.
Yes, absolutely. And as we've heard from the keynote speaker, the chair of the Parliamentary Select Committee for Science, Technology and Innovation, they've launched their first inquiry around the use, around the role of algorithms and social media in the riots that happened earlier in the year. Who'd like to go next?
I just want to kind of add to the point that I think the area of AI application with the most potential isn't actually, chatbots or things that actually interact with patients and people. I think, especially in healthcare, there's a lot of administrative burden that can also be enhanced and made more efficient by AI. And we can design systems that are human in the loop, as in like the output of AI doesn't actually get written into anything or interact with any real patients unless a human says that it's okay to do so. So I think there are means of innovating with AI that are less risky than what we would typically think of when we think of LLMs and OpenAI and chatbots. So I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. I certainly feel like a real chatbot fatigue at the end of, this like super hysterical public debate we've had over the past sort of 2 years. So I'm glad you said that. Mariangela, would you like to go first?
Right, should I end optimistically? So, I take that point of the gradient of adoption, right? I think that would make a difference in how things go. And so an ideal space to me would be, well, it will have too many criteria to ever happen. That's why it's an ideal. But among other things, it will be interdisciplinary. It will be inclusive at all stages of development of, the stakeholders and communities that have something at stake into it. And it will include a really sharp literacy of what these things are, right? So we're talking earlier in the keynote about adoption in the education system, right? And liberating professors from grading so they can do more of what they like, spending time with students. That's also a gradient, right? I'm a professor. Part of teaching is actually grading. That's a learning moment, right? You want to do that. It's a moment of intervention. And so what is happening in the United States right now is that the big tech is pushing this, ChatGPT and all these systems into education system, K-12 especially, but also into universities. And it's trying to transform our students into prompt engineers who know how to interact with these models, who also believe that these models are search engines, which they are not, and who do not understand that there's a lot of hallucination, there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of so many problematics into the results that they get from the chatbots. And so there's a danger there in transforming an education already declining because of Twitter, current X, whatever, and other, social media outlets that do not guard very well for propaganda, basically. So we have a declining education system. Put in AI that is adopted uncritically and without skill, what are you going to have? An easily manipulated population, really ripe for the picking for the fascist regimes, right? And I think that's a global risk, basically. And so, ideally speaking, we will be thinking and adopting these modes of being critical and also fixing the problems along the way.
Yes, thank you for highlighting the need for critical thinking more than ever, maybe. And finally, Rachel.
Well, I suppose if I had to say anything, is that, I know this has been a bit pessimistic, but I'm an optimist. I think technology is amazing. The reason I've spent 30 years making it is because it is amazing. It can do incredible things, right? And I think power is amazing too, right? And Elon Musk won't last long in the White House. He's there. I don't know what he's doing. But this moment will be over and we can make many others. And I think that's what I'm optimistic about.
Well, thank you. Please join me with a round of applause.